Hello and welcome to this month's space exploration news, keeping you up to date with the latest efforts to slip the surly bonds of Earth. This month we've got Artemis, SpaceX, Northrop Grumman's Antares rocket and the International Space Station. We're days away from the launch of the long-awaited Artemis 1, weeks away from the launch of Starship, months away from China completing its Tiangong space station, and just a few years away from Russia pulling out of the International Space Station in a fit of pique. Jenny, what have you got for us?
Well, I'm going to follow your lead, Ralph, and my first and actually only news story this month. I know. Like,
goodness me.
One. I'm only doing one. I
Just
know.
one.
I'm trying to learn the lesson that Ralph has tried to teach me about a dozen times to like not go over on time. But I'm sure I'm still going to go over on time on one news story because I'm going in depth, and it is, of course, all about Artemis 1 because it is happening. I can't actually believe that we're here. We are going back to the moon in less than a fortnight. It's just...
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, okay, by we, I mean 3 dummies called Helga, Zora, and Commander Moonikin Campos. So you can guess which one was named by a public competition.
Yes.
And
To be fair, 3 dummies is a pretty good description of us as well.
Yeah.
yeah, that is fit. That is fit. And then by going back to the moon, I mean zipping around it a few times and then coming back to Earth. But that is closer than we've been with people-sized capsules since the 70s.
Yep.
So I'm taking it as a win.
Absolutely.
Now, Artemis 1 is currently scheduled to lift off on the 29th of August at 8:33 a.m. EDT, so that's Eastern Time in the US, which is 33 minutes past 12 Universal Time. And although there are no people on board and they aren't actually landed on the moon, we really care about this mission because it is absolutely critical to getting to those next stages. Because if Artemis 1 fails, then we're not going to be putting boots on the moon anytime soon.
Yeah.
Now, Artemis 1 is essentially a dry run, a full end-to-end test of NASA's SLS, so that's a Space Launch System rocket, and the Orion crew capsule. Now, without Artemis 1, the capsule will not be certified safe for human passengers. And we also won't know if the SLS works, because remember, the rocket hasn't actually flown yet.
Yeah.
Artemis 1 will be the rocket's maiden voyage, after things, you know, mostly worked in that dry test run a couple of months ago.
If you fudge it, squint a little bit, stand on one leg.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the whole mission is slated to last 43 days, so it's sort of about 9 days to lunar orbit, and then we've got 13 days in lunar orbit, 18 days to get out of lunar orbit and then return and splash down in the Pacific Ocean near San Diego in California. Now, as you might expect, liftoff will be from Kennedy Space Center, Florida, with the SLS producing 15% more thrust than the Saturn V rocket that we last used to go to the moon. And quite right, because there's been more than 50 years of innovation since we first went to the moon. So, of course, like, the damn rocket should be a bit more powerful since then. Now, unfortunately, none of the SLS rocket hardware is recoverable. So the main stage, the 2 solid rocket boosters, the 4 recycled space shuttle engines. Yes, you heard that right, folks. There's no new engines here. You know the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Because, you know, nothing bad ever happens to shuttle engines. Am I right? Yeah. So about 8.5 minutes after launch, the Orion capsule will reach orbit. And then 2 hours later, after being powered by the SLS upper stage, it'll be on its lunar trajectory and the Orion capsule will be on its way to the moon. Now, once it's at the moon, the Orion capsule will enter what's called a distant retrograde orbit. And distant because it's going on loop kind of really far from the moon, actually, about 64,000 kilometers or 40,000 miles, and that is actually going to set a brand new record for the greatest distance from Earth for a crew capsule.
Oh yeah.
And then and then the retrograde part is because it's going to be going sort of backwards in a sense. It's going to be going around the moon opposite to the way that the moon spins, so that's where the retrograde bit comes in. but it'll skim past the moon very closely, just 111 kilometres above the surface, or about 69 miles or so. And then it'll either orbit the moon 1.5 times or half a time. They haven't quite decided yet. It depends sort of what happens on the mission. It's just, yeah, those are the kind of ratios that will allow it to then come back. But when it comes back, it'll skim past the moon again and then, you know, head back to Earth. Now, the capsule itself is not going to be empty. You know, there's the usual pins and flags and other memorabilia, but probably the most important are the dummy passengers. So Commander Campos will be wearing, and therefore testing, the Orion Crew Survival System spacesuit, which is designed for launch and re-entry. And the commander is also going to be fitted with a myriad of sensors to record vibrations and acceleration and radiation levels, you know, because it's kind of important to understand those for actual human adventures. Now, Helga and Zohar, on the other hand, are basically fleshy meat sacks because they're made of materials that simulate soft tissue, bones, and, very critically, typical female organs. So yes, that is right, we are talking breasts to give them their medical name. And this is in preparation for sending the first woman to the surface of the moon with Artemis 3. And it is really important to make sure that radiation vests actually work for different anatomies, which is something that seatbelt testers could take a leaf out of. Just saying, just saying.
More female engineers needed in space and in automotive manufacturing.
Yes. Well, just more females anywhere in STEM, quite frankly. Just like all the sectors everywhere. Now, hitching a ride alongside Artemis are a dozen or so CubeSats, and they're going to conduct experiments and observations that are going to help scientists and researchers learn more about the deep space environment and how to prepare for human exploration beyond the moon. Because, of course, we know that that is the ultimate goal of Artemis. We're going to practice on the moon, rehearse, and eventually head to Mars, maybe in the 2030s. Now, a few of the more interesting ones are Lunar Ice Cube, which is searching for water on the moon. We've got Biosentinel, which will spend 18 months investigating how living organisms are affected by deep space radiation. And Aquelus, which will image Earth's plasmasphere to understand how radiation damages electronics and humans during deep space flight. Because, of course, this is not a problem on the International Space Station, because that sits happily within the Earth's protective magnetic field. But of course, this is not true for a lunar journey. So it's to understand how the radiation of deep space is going to impact us. And then finally, we cannot end the story of Artemis 1 without talking about one very special extra passenger announced just a couple of weeks ago.
Kill me now.
Shaun the Sheep.
Yay! Yes! It's Shaun the Sheep. It's Shaun the Sheep.
Shaun the Sheep. Yeah, right?
Yay.
Okay, so I don't know how widespread Shaun the Sheep is kind of outside of the UK, but Shaun is a right little cheeky chappy and he's always getting himself into mischief, much to the farmers' frustrations. And he's going to be joining Helga, Zora, the commander, and yes, my dear American friend Snoopy on their flight. Now, I cannot resist quoting the Aardman website's blog post about Shaun's upcoming adventures, right? It is sublime. So on the Aardman website, they say, in preparation for this flight, Shaun began a programme of astronaut training and familiarisation with the Orion spacecraft and its European service module in 2020, travelling to various locations across Europe and the USA to see different aspects of the mission. This training was documented and will be presented in a series of ESA blog posts leading up to launch. So we've all got that to look forward to. We're going to see Shaun the Sheep in his astronaut training. Then, under the supervision of an ESA team, this flight prepared Shaun for his role as a space traveller in his film, a Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon, which was released in 2019.
It's a good film.
It offered insight into the rigorous training that all astronauts undertake to prepare for spaceflight, which he will now experience for real. And ESA's director, this is ESA's Director for Human and Robotic Exploration, okay, like an actual important human in ESA, Dr. David Parker, and he said, "This is an exciting time for Shaun and for us at ESA. We're woolly very happy that he's been selected for the mission, and we understand that although it might be a small step for a human, it's a giant leap for lamb kind."
The best bit about that is Ralph hates it.
I know. I can see Ralph's face throughout this entire thing. He's just been like, kill me now.
A little bit of him's died.
I know. And then just to end, if Artemis doesn't launch on the 29th, there's launch windows on the 2nd of September, the 5th of September, and so on for quite a few weeks. So, you know, it's happening at some time or another in the next coming month.
Yeah, I think there are dozens of launch windows, you know, stretching from now until January, you know, so, there's so many opportunities almost every day for this to go.
How can you not be happy about Shaun the Sheep going? I just love that Aardman, who are like the creators behind Shaun the Sheep, they're just leaning into this. I just love it. This is how you do SciComm. You know, we were moaning about like the way that NASA handled the JWST press releases. This is how you do SciComm.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Aardman are what do you call it? An animation house, and yet they can't even bother to do an animation. They're going to do a bloody blog that nobody reads these days anyway. So, how much are they leaning into it?
But they've already done a film, Farmageddon. Were you like not listening?
It's a great film. It's a good film. It's a good film. It's actually very funny.
Oh my god!
Come on, Paul. Please bring this down to earth.
Well, actually,
Sean.
Down to earth is very appropriate because first we need some SpaceX news, but not the normal launch news or kablooey news. This time it's ironic twist debris news. Debris news. So. Just after we all jabbered away a couple of weeks ago, a Chinese rocket booster fell back to Earth and caused all sorts of consternation and not a little xenophobia and finger-pointing across the globe. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson threw his tuppence worth in, declaring the failure to share the details of the rocket's descent was irresponsible and risky. All spacefaring nations should follow established best practices and do their part to share this type of information and in advance to allow the reliable predictions of potential debris impacts, risk, especially for heavy lift vehicles like the Long March 5B, which weighs 20 tons, by the way, which carry a significant risk of loss of life and property. Doing so is critical to the responsible use of space and to ensure the safety of people here on Earth. I don't know how good an impression that was of him, but it was like
I don't think he's English, Bill Nelson.
It was
former
like
Senator Bill Nelson.
Yeah, it was like he was in the room for me, frankly.
I'm guessing when it comes to American rockets, potentially, he's not quite as eloquent or as firebrandy, is he?
You see, so this, that was while there was certainly, a correct and required level of criticism being levelled at China, and we've certainly spoken about the lack of apparent kind of maturity in some of their space policy and procedures. This was the third time in 2 years for that. I mean, crumbs. There was a lot of unnecessary vitriol and unpleasantness on display in many quarters regarding this, and the Long March 5B booster re-entered over the Indian Ocean, and while initially it appeared to fall into the blue wet stuff, some small debris has apparently been located in Malaysia and Indonesia, but that was it. It didn't actually hit anything. Well, in a twist so beautifully ironic, it will probably give you whiplash. At almost the same time, a Dragon capsule re-entered the atmosphere and broke up as planned. It's one of those cargo ones where they dispose of all the crap. Except what wasn't planned or warned or shared is that part of the capsule impacted Australia and was found in a sheep paddock in New South Wales. It's a circular sheep again. The origin of the debris was confirmed by the Australian Space Agency, who are now coordinating the response and are apparently in contact with the US and SpaceX about how to proceed. So far, 3 large pieces of what is thought to be the lower half of the capsule have been found on farms in the Snowy Mountains. I love how they name things on Australia. They're mountains, they've got snowy mountains. And it's thought that more will turn up in the months and years to come. SpaceX haven't commented so far. I think it's a bit like an insurance claim when you hit someone else's car, you don't admit fault. So you just say, hey, look at that, we spontaneously collided. So they haven't commented so far, but it does go to demonstrate that even long-term spacefaring nations with all the experience sometimes get it wrong too. And both incidents highlight the kind of insane stories that we get whipped up about impending death from above when it comes to space debris really need to calm down a bit, because you know.
Can I apologise for our last awesome astronomy video then?
What's you got to apologise for?
Our last video that, as we're recording this, I launched today, has the headline, "Prepare for falling debris."
We're all going to die.
To be fair, the ISS is quite big.
Yeah, yes,
It's not just a 20-ton single booster or the back end of a capsule. It's quite large.
No, in my research, it looks like between 25 and 82 tons of it is going to land on Earth. That's how much won't burn up.
And if
Can I buy some as a souvenir?
And
like,
if
you can
please,
get to
will
the
someone
bottom of
salvage it?
Point Zemo in the middle of the Pacific, yes.
it's histories to go by in terms of kind of success rate of Americans deorbiting things, Australia probably should start buying hard hats.
Yeah, I mean, America's last space station came down, parts of it in Australia.
It certainly did. It certainly did. Good old Skylab. Well, that's that. So next for me is the news.
Oh, just before you move on, Paul.
Go on.
Can I just ask a question? Since this is going to land in a sheep farm, are we going to be hearing at some point from Aardman saying that, unfortunately, for unforeseen reasons, Shaun can no longer make it up on the Artemis rocket? Although if anybody wants any lamb chops, please get in touch with Nick Parks.
He's Shaun the Chop. He's Shaun the Chop. Well, next for me is the news that Northrop has found a way out of a hole it found itself in with its Antares rocket. Now, this has been one of those quiet, unassuming launchers that has worked away in the background, even launching from the almost forgotten Wallops flight facility at the MARS, as it's called, the Mid-Atlantic Region Spaceport, which is the commercial launch centre, the commercial launch centre attached to the NASA one. Well, Antares has done 16 launches since 2013, taking the Cygnus cargo resupply vehicle to the ISS. With the exception of the spectacular failure on the fifth launch that saw the rocket, I don't know if you remember this one, it fell back to the launch pad in a sort of epic fireball 6 seconds into flight.
Oh, yes.
Yes, do you remember it? It's sort of like massive explosion.
Now.
Yeah, it was really spectacular. It was one of the best kind of launch crashes we've had for years. It's done so pretty reliably and with little fanfare. So this nice little rocket had a growing problem, though, as it's powered by Russian engines. Initially, in the Series 100, it was 1960s era NK-33s, and then later in the RD-181s, which are a similar type to the Energy rocket in the 200 series that they've been firing. Well, as the years since the cosy relationships of the post-Cold War world of the 1990s have faded, so have the potential supply and political issues of Northrop using these engines. And this has really come to a head in the last few months, as you can imagine, with the invasion of Ukraine. So much so that the next two Antares launches have a bit of a question mark over them. Yeah, exactly, about engine supply and spares and things like that. Well, on the 8th of August, Northrop announced its new 330 series Antares rocket, and not only is this a larger beastie with a bigger payload, it is also dispensing with the Russian power plants and moving to 7 new Miranda engines being developed by Firefly Aerospace.
Oh, Firefly.
Good old Firefly. Yes, exactly. Who will also supply composite structures and fuel tanks for this new first stage they're going to build, which also solves their potential other supply problem over this vehicle, which is that most of the first stage section was built in Ukraine. Yeah, not good news for Ukraine, but good news for the Antares rocket. Yeah. The upper stages were already built in the US, including Northrop's own Castor engines, but this new deal not only creates a new, more powerful launcher, but also makes the content of the rocket predominantly domestic, which solves both supply and security concerns and would appear to secure the future of this useful, unassuming logistics launcher.
Yeah, that's a nice collaboration between one of the big defence giants and one of these startups, commercial space companies.
Yeah,
it's nice to see. But the big news story we're going to talk about this month is the International Space Station, because there's been so much news coming out about this, not least the fact that, well, Roscosmos got a new chief last month. So Roscosmos is the Russian space agency, and Dmitry Rogozin, who was a very outspoken head of NASA, very belligerent, he got the boot, and they installed a new head in the form of the former Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Borisov. And losing no time in making his own mark, He said in a meeting with Vladimir Putin that Russia would fulfill its obligations to its partners on the ISS before leaving the project. This was last month, and saying the decision to leave the station after 2024 has been made, to which Putin responded, "Good." Then, in an official NASA statement on August the 10th, it was confirmed that all the current ISS partners, which includes Russia as well, will continue working on it beyond 2024. So, I mean, just who knows what's happening? It seems like it's just this same kind of Russian thing of, and I don't want to be all Russophobic about this, but when it comes to space flight, they do like, particularly with the last Roscosmos chief Dmitry Rogozin, and now with Yuri Borisov, they do like kind of throwing grenades into the mix and keeping that uncertainty up, because America has got some, you know, really fantastic plans going forward. I say fantastic in that you know, 10 years ago this would have seemed like fantasy rather than, you know, necessarily being great ideas. I think they are good ideas, but there are big plans afoot for commercial space on the ISS, aren't there?
There are. It always had a slightly commercial aspect, and growing. I think,
yes,
is
I think that is a good point. It's not anything new. It's just on
No.
a bigger scale, isn't it?
No, exactly. There's always been various sort of companies have used it for experiments. I mean, even from a UK perspective, it was really interesting when the UK kind of finally joined the ISS again after it was one of the original signatories and then left. That loads of British companies signed up to do experiments on the space station, and when Tim Peake went up, some of his time was actually working on various sort of commercial experiments. Things like Rolls-Royce and things like that were doing stuff on the ISS. So there's always been this kind of commercial element to it, that it's not just pure governmental kind of blue skies science going on there. That it actually has had these sort of kind of corporate links and things where there's actually, even on these sort of state missions, there's been sort of corporate experiments going on. And of course we've had space tourists in the past as well who've paid to go there, and that's happened. So there's always been this kind of element. So in a sense it's nothing new, but now this is kind of accelerating now. This is I think the NASA and ESA and the Canadian Space Agency and JAXA and Roscosmos basically saying, yeah, do you know what? We've kind of done what we wanted with the ISS. We've got other things now, but this thing exists. We don't necessarily want to just completely throw it away immediately. Who wants it? And basically, what other kind of commercial and science return can we get from it before it's disposed of? I think is kind of the viewpoint.
Yeah.
And we've got various things going on. So we've got Axiom Space, for instance, which was selected just before the whole. It kind of got lost in the pandemic thing.
Yeah.
But they selected to develop those modules for the ISS, the first commercially developed modules, and they're going to be delivered in 2024, and then the second one in 2025. Which, of course, going back to that Russian statement, is kind of like, but
that's an American company, isn't it? So can they just go ahead without Russia? Do they need Russian participation? Probably not, but you know, Russia provides the propulsion element for the ISS. Are they still going to be involved or not? It's a mess.
They do provide the propulsion, but then there's also been a Cygnus capsule docked. You know, it recently undocked a few weeks ago, and that was purposefully adapted to provide propulsion, and it successfully boosted the orbit of the ISS. So the fact that Russia provides the propulsion,
the Russians can't undock their sections. That isn't going to happen. I mean,
well, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, could they do that? Because I've been wondering this, but it's like really, it would just be a case of abandoning it or selling it to the Americans or something. I don't know.
The Russian, if you can make money from it by selling it, why wouldn't you?
I think actually what you might see is that Roscosmos will kind of go, okay, look, we'll leave the modules there. We will provide kind of support for it basically on a commercial basis. They'll essentially become a commercial partner and provide some of those logistic services to propulsion and life support and things like that, which is what those sections do. But they won't have Russians on board. They won't. It'll just be kind of
hardware.
They
basically.
provide the hardware and some ground support and some of the technical know-how.
Yeah.
But they'll probably do it on the other partners will pay them for it potentially, and just say like, okay, well, we will pay you for that kind of to be there. There's no way they can take those modules off. That's fantasy.
Yeah.
That's
going to burn up with the rest of it in 2031 as it still stands.
Yeah, you would need something like the space shuttle to be in a position to kind of dismantle the space station and to take bits apart and move them and things like that. That ain't going to happen. That's just not possible.
But I think that Axiom Space, for me, that's the one that looks like it's got the greatest legs. For the first instance, it's the one that's the closest to actually launching and putting habitats on the International Space Station. But also on the last, I think it was the last Dragon capsule up to the ISS, the SpaceX capsule, it was actually CEOs and company executives from Axiom that went up there so that they could do some of this prep work for it. And they've got plans that once the ISS is finished with and starts getting decommissioned, they're actually going to take the modules off the ISS and connect them together, and that will be a permanent habitat for
they're
paying
basically
customers.
using the ISS like a sort of scaffold. They're going to build their own space station on it. So we've got those first two modules in 2024 and 2025, which are habitation. Then the third one, because they're planning sort of a cadence of once a year, the third one is going to be research and manufacturing. And then when they put the fourth one on, then it's going to sort of escape from the ISS and be its own self-contained unit. And then
I didn't realise it had that cadence though.
Yeah, that's what their plan is. Of course, timelines sort of slip inevitably when unexpected things happen. But so we're looking 2027, 2028, the Axiom Space are going to have their own fully functioning commercial space station. And, then the ISS will be, it's already going to be retiring by around 2030. We know it's not planned to extend. By then it'll be 40 years old, won't it? Did they first start building it in the 90s?
And 98 was the first module.
To explain to me, thinking like, hang on a minute, we just said we couldn't take the Russian modules off, but we can take these Axiom ones off. These Axiom ones are kind of like additional add-ons to...
Yeah, they're designed to...
Exactly, they're designed to pop off. They're just a kind of... They're hanging on, and then they're like a capsule from a rocket or something like they dock on and then they can undock. The main modules, the ISS, just are too structurally integrated to just like unbolt and undock. That doesn't work like that. It's kind of like saying like small like boats on a larger boat. You can't take bits of the whole big ship off, but you can lower smaller boats off and things like that. It's that kind of idea. You can put other cargo on a ship, but you can't dismantle the ship; it'll just fall apart. And it's that idea. Just in case people have been confused, thinking, "Hang on a minute, you just said you can't take the module."
No, it's a fair point.
But it is. It's not the same. But it's sorry.
Yeah, they're not the only ones, right? There's Nanoracks, there's Northrop Grumman, and then the combination of Blue Origin and Sierra Space.
And I've got to admit, until this announcement came out, I'd never even heard of Nanoracks.
No. And I still don't know too much about them, but yeah, they've been commissioned to develop their own space stations for low Earth orbit. And, Northrop Grumman, they've got loads of experience in aeronautics, but most recently, of course, their Cygnus capsule, which means they've been interacting with the International Space Station. So they've been gathering knowledge there. And then, Blue Origin, we know about the penis rocket and everything.
And the New Glenn that will be the big mega rocket, hopefully, to get things into orbit. Yeah.
And then Sierra Space, they have their Dream Chaser, which is going to be the sort of...
Are we actually going to get to see that now, finally fly?
Well, next year is the tentative plan. Yeah. So the Dream Chaser is going to be... the sort of other option for resupplying the ISS. So, of course, once they manage that, then they've got connections to the ISS and they're building their knowledge. So, these companies they might sound out of the blue, but actually they are building on a lot of knowledge base. And then Nanoracks, they're sort of building Starlab, that's what they're calling it. They're planning to launch that in 2027, 2028. And that is going to be a mix of science and manufacturing, but also critically, and this is where the commercial element comes in, entertainment and hospitality, because it has to be financially viable. When it's a government-owned, you know, space station like the ISS, it doesn't have to be profitable because it's there for pure science and knowledge gain. Whereas when you've got commercial ventures, you've got to have the commercial part of it. You have to be making money somewhere, and you know, that's where the in-space manufacturing comes from. You know, we've talked about this before, where there are things that you can do in the unique microgravity environment of space that you can't do on the Earth, like really efficient fiber optics and 3D printing organs and all sorts of stuff like that. And then, of course, well, entertainment and hospitality, so it's hotels for the billionaires, isn't it? I mean, that that's what it is. That's what they mean by entertainment and hospitality. And, you know, any of us who are lucky enough to win a competition to get up there, you know, all of us plebs who can then get up there.
But
and,
by the grace of a billionaire.
All those enormous folk.
It's very exciting because it potentially means that as we see the ISS decommissioned, actually there'll be a whole series of other space stations in orbit.
Yeah, and NASA's plan is that there'll be lots of competing ones that are all viable and not, you know, creating a, you know, one of them monopolising. There'll be lots, and they'll all need launchers for access to space, and it should just be this blossoming space environment that we're all expecting. Of course, that'll upset Jen because there's bigger pieces of junk in space, and there'll be bigger spacecraft in space that's ruining the night sky for radio astronomers and X-ray astronomers.
You know what, though? When it's a really big target, like the International Space Station, you can go, oh yeah, there it is. But when it's like a tiny bit of rocket,
when there's 12,000 little bastards floating around,
satellites, and it's just in the background, then it's a problem. At least, you know, if we've got 4 or 5 space stations, we can be like, that's space station, that's space station. Don't point it over there for a couple of minutes, you know. Whereas when you've got 12,000 Starlink like crisscrossing across your sky, it's like,
or with laser communications between them in the infrared.
Jesus,
I'm just with Gateway as well coming together, you know, sort of that we are
the lunar space station.
Yeah, exactly. There is that lovely potential that we just inching towards that 2001 image of space, aren't we?
It is, isn't it?
Where you launch into orbit and there are loads of space stations, and then you fly off to the moon and there's another space station, and then down on the ground there is a moon base, and actually
it's getting there.
It's like 30, 40 years late when all that's come together, but it's kind of starting to happen, and that's really
I think
cool.
the key enabler is these commercial spaceflight companies that are having to do things in a more agile fashion, a lot cheaper fashion, but also trying new things like reusability that is just a game changer for it. And I think in 2001 the moon base was a commercial moon base, wasn't it? A mining base.
He launched a Pan Am rocket, doesn't he? He flies.
Do you know who was on that? Leonard Rossiter was on that in the film. So for our English listeners, Americans won't know who Leonard Rossiter is, but that's Rigsby from Rising Damp, and he was actually in 2001 taking a space plane up to the space station.
Yes, I'd forgot that.
See, I think the actual enablers are not all of these companies. I think it's just science fiction writers.
You might be right, you know.
Everything that people are writing about, you know, they were writing about it 50, 60 years ago, whatever, like, it's just all happening. And you know, you look at like Star Trek and they've got all of like their touch screens and everything, and like touch screens are everywhere now. I blame the science fiction writers. You know, it's like, I just feel like everything is coming from, it's sort of going the other way, because it was always science inspiring science fiction, and now I feel like we've come full circle and people are kind of looking at all the sci-fi stuff and they're like, oh, we could actually do that.
Let's just hope it's not like Aliens,
eh? War of the Worlds.
So tell us what you think about any of these stories. Drop your comments in the comments box below, and check out these videos before you go. God, I want to die.
Check out these videos and these ones and these ones.
Subscribe.
Like us and subscribe.
Hit that
Retweet
bell.
and tell your friends.
Hit that bell.